Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today I'm going to show you how to take small stamps and make Paisley designs. We're going to make a really fun country themed card, and we're going to use some rubber stamps from our sponsor, Rubber Stamp Tapestry. You can find them online at pegstamps.com, and you can use any sort of small, medium, and large flower shapes. And you're also going to want some something with stem and leaves, something kind of with that oblong shape, some either small dots or flowers, just small things like that. And I am using this little horse from the stamp set Giddy Up to make my embellishment, but of course you could always replace that with a button if you didn't have that stamp set. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to do some stamping and embossing. If you have a really good white ink pad, you can use that, but I always seem to have a hard time with white inks. So what I'm going to do is I am going to use Versamark embossing powder and also a Versamark pen, and those can also be found at pegstamps.com. We're going to start by stamping the largest image, which is this kind of starburst flower shape from the Hooray set. And I'm going to do it once in the bottom corner and once in the top corner. Not really in the corners, but kind of closest to that direction. And then I am going to take my embossing marker. I'm going to use a bullet tip because it's a little bit easier for me to use. And I'm going to draw a kind of yin-yang or teardrop shape around it. I don't know if you can really, maybe if I tip it to the light you can kind of see that. You'll see it when I emboss it. I am just basically doing kind of a large teardrop shape. Now I like to emboss at this point because it's just a little easier for me to see what I have. I'm just going to sprinkle that with some powder here. And this is white embossing powder. Again, if you have a white ink pad, totally fine to use that. My white ink pads were not giving me the results I wanted on this paper, so that's why I'm using the embossing powder. I am going to go ahead and heat this right now because I'm afraid that if I do some more stamping, the paper might dry out and then my powder might not stick to the paper. It might blow off on these first images. So I like to go ahead and heat this right after I do it. Since all of the white images are going to be done by heat embossing, I want to get them all in right off the bat. So I'm going to start with this flower from Retro Sundress, but you can use any sort of medium to small size flower you want. And you just want to put it kind of randomly filled in or scattered throughout the design. Don't try to force it in anywhere, just try to fit it in pretty naturally. And then I'm also going to do this little one here, so a teeny tiny flower, and again I'm just kind of spacing it in. Remember, the rocks in a jar, we don't want to put we got to put our big ones in first, and then we work our way smaller so we can spread things out and space things out evenly. And then I'm going to go back in and cover this with powder and emboss it again. If you have any stray embossing powder like I did, I over-inked my stamp, just go in with a small brush and brush it away, and then heat emboss. This is what we have after embossing the white, and now I'm going to do the black stamping. And I kept, this is my tip here, if you're working with multiple ink pads and multiple colors, keep a couple little dishes and put your stamps that go to each ink pad together so you don't accidentally grab like a stamp with black ink on it and stamp it on your clear Versamark pad, because that would be a bummer. I know I need to stamp this guy for my embellishment later, so I'm just going to stamp him on a scrap of teal so he has time to dry. And I'm just going to set that aside. All right, and I'm also going to set that stamp aside because I don't need it for this part of the project. Now when you are using black, now see how I didn't trim? A lot of times I go in and I trim off the excess rubber there. If you don't choose to trim yours, just make sure you very carefully stamp straight up and down on your ink pad so you don't get that extra ink anywhere. So I'm stamping these underneath the big flowers to complete my kind of Paisley shape there. Okay, and that's all I'm using that one for. Now I am going to go around with these other stamps that I picked out. I'm going to use this little dotty vine here. And what I'm going to do is to kind of mimic that shape that I did inside the Paisleys, because Paisley is all about doing this kind of whimsical loose pattern. I'm going to stamp kind of little tails on my little flowers here. They almost look like hibiscus flowers. So I'm just using the registration mark there that's on my stamp to kind of line up the bottom of the stem. And as long as I stamp it so that that is towards the center of the flower I'm stamping it next to, it's going to work out really well. And so now all those have little black tails. Now I'm going to go in with this little filler flower. This is from Cherry Blossom, so it's got 3 tiny little flowers. This works out really well for filling in any extra space, and it's really light and airy. So even if it stamps on top of something, it's not going to really overwhelm it. And you can go ahead and let the stamp go off of the page. So that's totally fine. That'll help extend the design. I really should have a scrap of paper underneath this because this Versamark ink is going, or VersaFine colored ink is going to stay wet for a long time, so I'll probably end up smudging it, but the card base is black, so I don't have to worry about that so much with this one. I'll just need to wipe it with a rag and some stamp cleaner or something when I'm done to make sure I don't have anything on there. And I do know I'm going to want to ink the edges, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that while I have my black ink pad out. And the only other thing we're going to need here for this is a white paint pen or a white gel pen. And they work really well for this. In fact, you could use that to do the teardrops like shape. My Posca pen worked really well for this, as would a white gel pen. I had a bullet tip marker that I tried to do that with, and I like the effect, but I did notice it kind of soaked into the paper a little bit and didn't give me the crisp look that I was going for, so that's why I ended up using the pen here. Oh, something else I wanted to add into the center. Well, I'm going to do that with a pen, I think. Adding little dots here and there. And then if you have any like embossing mishaps, like you got a little stray bit of powder here and there, that's a great way to kind of make it fit the design. And it just kind of balances out that white because the white is so strong on that red paper. You could dot the center of the black flowers if you wanted to. Any place you want to put them. You could probably even close your eyes and do a really good job at, putting little dots in, because you won't be thinking about it too much. You could also do this with a black pen if you wanted some more black inside the Paisley design. Just have fun with it and kind of fill it as you like. Now you're going to want to let this dry before you proceed on to the next step with this. Otherwise you might smear the paint, but it only takes a few minutes to dry. While this is drying, we can work on the other part of our card. So I have this, I have a couple embossing folders. This one here is a wood grain. It's one of the thick ones. And I have just embossed a couple panels here. And I also embossed an all over gingham pattern here. Now, if you have an older die cut machine, or for whatever reason you're not getting a good impression with your embossing folders, there's a couple things you can do. So if it's an all over design like this, and you notice maybe one side is not embossing as well as the other side, and I did have that happen with this one, but I thought I'm going to ink it, it's no big deal. But I did get smudges on this side because it wasn't as raised as the other side. So what I did was, the next time I did this, I put it through my machine one way, and then I flipped it over and put it through again, and that would give me that pressure on both sides that I need. So that's something you can do. Another thing you can do if you're noticing you're not getting pressure all over your embossing folder properly is to take a piece of cardstock, and then when you run it through the next time, just put that cardstock where you're not getting the pressure and roll it through with this on top of your embossing folder between your cutting pads, and that will give you the pressure you need to get a really good emboss. Now, when your machines are a few years old, like my machine is about 10 years old, it's just lost some, oomph in certain areas. So sometimes you got to do that, but that'll extend your usability of your machine. And what I'm going to do here is ink this up, because this is going to be my background layer, and I can do my inking now so that it can have time to dry. I want to have the rough side up, and I want to have the rough side up on these as well. So I want to have the side with the grooves up, because that's going to give me a really nice border for my card. And I'm actually going to work on a piece of scrap paper so I don't get any more ink on my stamping pad. So I'm going to use Distress inks here just because they're meant for inking backgrounds, and I don't typically stamp with these, so it just gives me a nice use for them. If you're really worried about keeping the background nice and clean, you could use a brayer, so you could pick up your ink with a brayer, but I'm usually not too bothered to do that. This works just fine for me, so I'm going to set that aside to dry. You can go more, you can do more inking if you want a more strong pattern, and you can also do this in any other color that you're using in your card. Now for this, I'm going to use brown. This is Vintage Photo. And I'm going to be cutting apart these little panels of wood, or these little strips of wood, to make a frame for my card. Now the other thing that I want to do right now, because it's also requiring some inking, so I want to give it a chance to dry, is I want to punch out this little horse that we stamped, because that should be nice and dry now, and I want to ink the edges of it. So I'm just going to center it up on my punch. So if you punch upside down, you can kind of center up what you've stamped, and then I am just going to ink the edges with black ink here, and give that a chance to dry. Okay. And I'll also go ahead while I'm at it and punch a red scallop circle from a scrap of red. And I'll set those aside to work with later. Okay, so actually one thing I can do on this before I set it aside is that pattern that we were using on our Paisley, we can repeat those same elements on the frame of our scallop here. So what I'm going to do is I'll take this little stamp here, which is 3 dots. This is from the Winter Night Sky. And I can look at my registration mark and see that the 2 dot side is where that goes. So there'll be a single dot opposite from there. And I can just go and stamp those in. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then I can fill in with my pen. And honestly, I should have stamped that with, you know what? Let's flip it over. Let's do it again. I'm going to stamp that with my VersaFine. So there you can see how light a distress ink stamps. You can barely see it. VersaFine is going to stamp a lot better. So we'll go ahead and we'll just do that with the VersaFine ink. Teachable moment, guys. You gotta love the teachable moments. See how much darker that stands out. Now I do have a little bit of ink on the edge of my stamp, but that's alright. And then we'll just go in with a white pen and we will do some dotting with that. And just carry the design around. Just put dots where you think you need them. Doesn't have to, don't try to make a specific pattern or you're going to have to follow that the whole way. If you do a little more of a random pattern, then you can just kind of fill in as needed. So set those 2 pieces aside to dry and grab the piece that you did with the wood grain. And we're going to cut apart the wood grain pieces. And what you want to make sure is that on each wood grain board that you cut out, that you have 1 dark edge, because that's going to be the outside of our frame. And you need at least 4 of these pieces. This is such a great project for using up scraps. I think pretty much everything I've used here I've grabbed from my scrap bin, so that's wonderful. Now you're just going to need any piece of cardstock, and I cut it 1 inch bigger than my panel here, so I've got about a 1/2 inch all around to glue to, and that's going to be helpful for building my frame. And I am just going to go ahead and put some adhesive down. Remember, it doesn't matter what color this is because those wooden frame pieces are going to overlap it. And the first thing I'm going to do is put down a couple strips on the side. And if you notice you have a little bit of an edge showing from where you cut it, go ahead and just ink that. And I'm just going to eyeball it here. It wouldn't hurt to do this on a grid, just because it might be a little bit easier to, you know, keep your edges square, but it doesn't have to be perfect because we are doing a very rustic treatment here. So you just want to make sure that that's fairly lined up. If you flip it over, if the piece that you started with it got right angles, you can check to make sure that it's not too far off. And then I just kind of bring that back and set it down, and then I kind of figure out about how I want these to go, how big I want it. And kind of get an idea. Now when I'm happy with how much a border I have, and if everything looks like it's pretty square, what I will do is just kind of set this, just gently tap that to kind of tack it down. Okay, remember I put some adhesive, but it wasn't really strong adhesive, and I'm just gently tacking it down. And what I'm going to do is go over and trim the long ends, because that's what I'm going to be measuring against. That one got a little crooked, so just going to eyeball it here. Probably would be easier if I just measured things, but nobody got time for that. I'll trim that one. Okay, so then I'm going to go ahead and also trim these guys down, and then I'll know how to get my mitered corners by cutting in from the corner. Okay, you could actually leave it like this and have a just a kind of squared off edge. That would look fine. But I like a mitered edge. Okay, so to get your mitered edge, what you're going to do is you are going to cut in from the corner like that on each of these. And then you're going to grab your ink pad and ink it up. And you're probably going to need some really strong adhesive. The ATG adhesive is not super strong. It's strong enough usually for most applications, but when you have like a lot of embossing, it just reduces the amount of area that's going to be able to adhere. Oh, got a little extra there. So I like to use something that's a little bit stronger just to make sure that, you know, if you mail this and it's humid, you have any issues like that, it's not going to make your card fall apart. And I'm just going to remove that for now. And we're going to do the same thing up here. Cut in from the corners. And ink your edges. You can ink them, you can be as clean or as distressed as you want. I'm going to go again with the strong tape here. You could use hot glue, that would give you a little dimension if you wanted to do that as well. And then I like to just go through and give it another inking just to make sure that the frame has a nice dark border. And let's do a little more adhesive on the back of this just to make sure that, because it's got a lot of flat that can glue do, so I don't need the score tape on this. That's a pretty smooth piece of cardstock, and there we go. So there is our focal point. One more thing I want to do is add some brads. I think that looks nice because it looks kind of like nails on the in the wood. You can use minis, you can use screw top brads, you could use regular office supply store brads. I'm going to use like regular paper crafting brads. I get a bunch of different rustic colors. I think I'll use copper on this one. Oh, these distressed copper. This distressed copper looks kind of nice too. Maybe I'll use that one. Rather than a bright copper, I think it looks better. And just put those in the holes and set it aside. Now I want to show you the supply that really inspired this project. This set of kind of bandana Paisley washi tape. I thought this was so pretty, and I thought this would be really fun to see if I could build my own Paisley patterns, and I'm so glad it worked out because I think that's kind of another versatile way to use tiny stamps. So we are going to grab our gingham embossed background, and we're going to take our wide Paisley here. Now if you get washi tape that has stopped peeling really well, like it wants to rip on you, some tapes just want to do that. What you can do is heat this for a couple seconds with your heat tool, and it will it'll peel a lot better. So kind of keep that in mind. If you are if you're using washi tape and it just doesn't want to peel off for you, that's a good way to get it to behave. I think I'll bring that up just a little bit because it can be a little finicky. And I'm just going to wrap that around to the back because washi tape doesn't typically stick that great, so you do want to have that wrapped around to the back so it can have a little more adhesive on it. So we're going to see how that's going to line up. I'm going to do another strip of washi tape. I'm going to use this darker one because I've got a red punch out that's going to go on top of that, and I want to make sure I have some contrast. Now, I don't recommend hoarding washi tape, which is really hard because it's so pretty, right? And you just want to like have it, and it lasts so long. But the reason I don't recommend you hoarding washi tape is because the adhesive can go bad, and then it can be very difficult to unroll, and then it could go to waste. So I don't want that to happen to anybody. So if you buy washi tape, plan on using it up within like, you know, a year or two. And that way you will get joy from your supplies and you won't feel sorry that, you know, it went to waste. And this is the score tape here because I'm going on top of an embossed panel and I want to make sure it's going to stick really well. And plus I've got brads, so you know, I've got that texture on the back of the card from the brads, and I've got the texture on the embossed panel, so you know, you just need a little extra power when you're doing something like that. Now for this guy, I am going to use some of my famous foam squares that breed when I'm not looking. They came from an old kid's puzzle that I cannot find. I cannot find anymore, because I would totally recommend buying them, because it was a craft kit my kids had once, and there were sheets of these. And I've told the story like a million times, but there were sheets of these things, and they're like the best foam squares ever because they never dry out and like pop off my projects, and I've had that happen before with other stuff. But I can't find them. I can't find those little activity kits anymore because I guess they stopped making them. All right, let's pop that. Actually, let's hold on a second. Let's glue this onto our card base before we put that really dimensional element on. I am going to just use a lot of the ATG adhesive for this card base, but I'm putting it on the rows that have all of the flat area, so that it will have, like, see how there's all those flat squares? I'm making sure that's where my adhesive goes, so that there'll be a lot of area for it to bond with my card. And I've just made a card base out of heavy black cardstock. This is the, you can get this at any of the big box craft stores. Well, I know Joann's and Michael's have it. Actually, I shouldn't say any big box craft store because I'm not 100% sure that all of them have a heavyweight brand, but it's like 110-pound stuff. The stuff that's really thick, but it's really nice for a card base because it really feels good when you hold it and you give it to somebody. It feels like a luxury item. All right, so because it's a black card base, you need to do something so you can write on the inside. So what I'm going to do is put just a scrap of white cardstock in the middle, and I'm going to attach it with my washi tape. And I do this for a couple of reasons. For one, so you could see it. You could always write with a gel pen if you needed to on the white, but the thing I like about this, and see, I'm struggling with this washi tape, and it's brand new. The thing I like about this is that because washi tape is so low tech, it can actually be removed. And if somebody wants to give the card to somebody else, rather than throw it away when they're done, after they've like enjoyed it for a little while, they can, and then it's, you know, a little less waste. So you can even suggest that and I would suggest it to somebody, because I think somebody might feel cheesy if they're reusing a card. But if you say, hey, I attached that panel on the inside with washi tape so that you could reuse it if you wanted to, you could re-gift it and keep it out of the landfill, that would, I think, you know, make somebody feel a little, you know, relief, like, oh good, she doesn't expect me to keep this forever, and they can pass it along to somebody else. Because I don't know, there's some people who I give cards to a lot, and they're probably like, oh my word, another card? I hope she doesn't mind if I toss this. I don't mind. I totally understand. And if you want to throw in any other colors, you can, or you can just stick to the color theme you have used all along. This was a lot of fun. Change up to whatever color you like. You can always doodle on strips of cardstock too if you don't have the washi tape, and I think that would look just as well, just as nice. You could make your own gingham or plaid just by drawing stripes with a marker or using stencils. So you can totally make this this card using whatever supplies you have. You just need some tiny stamps. And if you need some tiny stamps, check out our sponsor, Rubber Stamp Tapestry. You can find them online at pegstamps.com, and don't forget to check the video description because I have a coupon code in there for you, so you can save a little more money on your order. Please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by. Until next time, happy crafting.